is going on, guys? Craig1287 here, bringing you yet another VR Essays video, this time changing things up just a little bit. I'm actually filming this outside on the front porch, and it was just such a nice day that I just wanted to get me some raspberry tea, or whatever the heck this is that I'm drinking, raspberry lemonade, and I don't know, this is just going to be kind of an experiment. I don't know how many episodes I will film with this setting. I have no idea what the audio is going to be like when it comes through on this. It might come through just fine and not pick up all the birds and air conditioning units and people mowing their lawns in the background, but still, it's a really nice, comfortable setting, so I just wanted to try filming this outside. So what this episode is going to be about is kind of an evolution or just going more in depth with what I was talking about with the VR episode 3, and that's talking about game balance, how things are going to be changing, the things that developers used to have control over, but still can have some control over, but they're going to have less control going into VR. So in that episode I talked about things like, you know, genres of games and how developers are going to have a little bit less control. It's also finding a balance of how to describe what I talked about. Is it developers having less control, or is it just players having more control? Because developers can still do a lot of different gameplay design choices to make the games be played in a certain way. But so yeah, I was kind of talking about how, like, you know, cover-based shooters. You know, right now developers specifically design a game to be a cover-based shooter, but right now with VR, you know, if I just want to crouch down and take cover next to something that is in the game, then I can do that. It's not really up to the developer in that regard. Or something like an arena shooter. In arena shooters, you don't really have that aspect of, like, aiming down sight in most of them, other than like a few select weapons, like a sniper rifle or something. You know, in Counter-Strike, there's only a few weapons that have scopes on them that you actually can aim down sight. And in VR, that's no longer the case. You can just aim down sight in any situation that you want to. The asset, the in-game asset, or the object is literally wherever you want to move it to be. It's no longer locked into a specific thing that sways, you know, how the game designers created it. So that's kind of what that episode was about. So now I want to talk more about, well, something like aim down sight. Like in traditional games, in something like Battlefield or Call of Duty, you have different, we'll just call them statistical changes in the code. You know, when you're firing, the weapon has a certain amount of recoil to it, and a certain amount of some games have a bullet spread and things like that. And when you aim down sight, that then is changed statistically. And then also things for, like, different grips. You know, and I'll use Battlefield as an example. You have the different kinds of grips. Whether you're going gripless, your weapon has just the base stats. But when you throw on you know, a vertical foregrip, then your weapon now has I can't remember the exact stat changes that it is in Battlefield 4, but we'll just go with an example of something like the side to side. The horizontal recoil gets reduced by 0.3. Sorry about that, guys. Actually, I had a neighbor walking by and was chatting up and didn't want to be on camera, so we'll just edit that out. So back to what I was saying. You know, hypothetical. I can't exactly remember the stat changes in Battlefield, but if you had like a foregrip, like a vertical foregrip on the gun, that would now make the horizontal, you know, left and right recoil slightly reduced by like 0.3 or something like that. But then it would also increase bullet spread. But then you could go and do a different kind of grip, and that would reduce the vertical recoil, and but then it would, I don't know, reduce your hip fire spread. You know, all these kind of things were like statistical changes that happened to the actual stats of the game in the code. But can that stuff translate for VR, or can it translate well, or are we just gonna have to come up with different things? Like, in the games now, the way that recoil is done is just so different, because you can't actually have it kick up like you can in traditional games, because I'm still looking straight. So you're going to end up having players that, to like counter that recoil, they might end up having to go like this, and then they're looking at the ground. So it's like we can't really do recoil the way we've traditionally done, which is why I think something like physical objects that we'll actually hold that actually have like recoil that pushes on your shoulder and things like that, I feel like they hopefully are going to catch on. Again, that's an added cost to VR, which is already a barrier as is right now. But so that's just something that developers are going to have to figure out. But also, like, you know, when do you define when it is aimed down sight? At what point, when I'm holding a gun and moving it closer to my body, does it become aimed down sight? So I feel like that's something that VR developers are going to have to overcome. And also, there are other things, not just like weapon attachments, that I think we need to start taking into account. But I use the example of Oddjob and Jaws from the 007 GoldenEye game that came out on the N64. One of the best examples that any child of the 90s can think of when it comes to like cheap tactics was you would always pick Oddjob, because the way that aiming in that game worked, you didn't have the two thumbsticks unless you had two controllers connected and one player was using the two controllers, which not many people knew you could do that. Oddjob would be based on the way that the game did the aim assist in it. Oddjob was a tougher target to hit. I mean, he was physically a shorter person in the game. And Jaws was the tallest player in the game, so he was kind of like hard mode. If you wanted to play as Jaws, that meant you were a good player, because you'd be able to, you were going to get shot a lot more often from further away than other people who picked Bond. Most people would pick Bond or Trevelyan or something like that. So that was something that was actually programmed into the game. But now with VR, people, their avatars in some games are the same height as their player is in real life. So one game that is one of the best examples of this is Rec Room. It's a free-to-play game, so a lot of people have access to it. It's an incredibly well-designed game, very polished. I still don't know or comprehend how these people are making money off of it, because it's really, really well done. It's updated frequently, and they don't charge for anything. So that game, you see a lot of short people moving around. The same kind of applies with raw data. You'll see shorter people there. So these people are typically not midgets, or whatever the politically correct term is. I'm sorry if I've offended anybody by saying midget. But yeah, it's typically not that. It's going to be something that somebody who owns VR, they have children, and their children are trying out the virtual reality stuff. And they try out raw data because it's a very family-friendly thing. They even have, you know, community guidelines where you can report people if they're swearing and things like that. So it's a very family-friendly game, and just the general aesthetics and the gameplay itself can appeal to young people. So a lot of people do let their children play this, and so you end up with a lot of kids in the game. And you know, for the paintball mode, do they get an advantage because they're shorter, because they're a smaller target, because more cover, they can take advantage of the cover? Is that something that developers are going to have to counter in the future? Are we going to force all people in game to be the same height? In that case, you know, their view is going to have to reflect that. If I'm looking at somebody who visually looks like they are at head's height, at equal height with some wall as cover, their in-game player is going to have to also see that, because if they actually see the game from there, they're going to think that they're way behind cover, but then they realize that their actual target that's able to be shot by players is, you know, higher against that cover. So you have to have what they see match up and line up with exactly what other people see. Battlefield games, again, use Battlefield for an example, have ran into this issue, and they would call them, oh, actually, what was the term that we had? Not corner campers, but head glitching. Yeah, we had head glitching. And that was a case where it's been patched, but what you would see, you know, your bullets, your gun actually was shooting exactly in the center of the screen. And so you could get things to where you were seeing people, but when other people saw your soldier's avatar in the game, you were actually inside of an object, and your gun would be like clipping through it. And so, yeah, that's been patched, and there's still problems with it though. It's still not a perfect system, and it's something that pops up in other shooters, traditional 2D flat shooters, and so it's something that's around there. So for VR, if we make everybody's avatar, what they see different. And I've gone over this in my motion sickness VRSA episode. If the mind sees things differently than what the ears, the vestigial fluid in the ears, vestibular fluid in the ears, there's that disconnect. Well, the same can apply even for your eyes. If your body is used to seeing things at this level for your height, and now all of a sudden you're this 6 foot tall person, is that going to cause a 4 foot tall child, or just an adult who's fairly short? Is that going to cause a motion sickness kind of thing? Is that going to cause them to get VR sickness? So that's another thing that we got to start thinking about, is just how different players are going to be represented in the world based on the different physical characteristics of them in real life. One thing that I've also encountered, this doesn't have to do with the person's physical size, but I've recently, the video is up, it's the one of me playing with my buddies Anargo and Nylum in the Serious Sam VR, the first encounter. They were both using teleport to navigate around the world. I was using the touchpad locomotion, which is what you see in things like Onward, Pavlov, things like that. And so I moved around the world smoothly. I feel like they had two different disadvantages. I had two disadvantages if it were something like PvP, or even if it was more competitive, but with the co-op. We're trying to get like the highest scores and things like that. Something that definitely screws up the balance. I was disadvantaged by two ways by using the touchpad locomotion. I was doing smooth movement throughout the world. So if it were something like PvP, it's a lot easier for them to actually see where my movements are. If I'm going across the street or something like that from cover to cover, they can see that. They can track that. Every single step of the way, my character, my avatar in the game, is moving through the world in a very predictable way because they're seeing every single bit of my movement. However, when I was looking at them, it was as if I was lagging, and it wasn't. I think I added an annotation or something like that in the video to make it clear that I wasn't lagging, and that's not why they were jolting around. It was because they were voluntarily using the teleport locomotion or blink locomotion. A lot of different names for all these kind of things, and so it makes them look like they're bouncing around the world, and it makes it incredibly difficult to track where they are and where they're going. And so if this was a PvP setting, like I would lose track of them all the time. And then when they're making that move, I can't shoot them at all during that jump. I mean, it's an instant jump, but that means I have to instantly, like, I'm not just following a target as they're moving. They are moving, and I'm having to aim like that, and that really throws you off. So in the future for VR games, and I'm going to be making another VR essay talking about cross-platform gaming, not between like Oculus and Vive and PSVR. Ubisoft's been doing that for a while. I'm talking about cross-platform between VR and 2D flat non-VR gaming. So keep an eye out for that. But so just within the VR space, if we have games where the developers are giving us different locomotion settings, which is amazing. In single-player games, I think that is such an important thing right now. If you're doing the Couts system from Freedom Locomotion, which I recently did a video on, or if you're doing Arm Swinger Locomotion, or if you're doing Blink or Teleport, the ones where you slowly travel through it, kind of like raw data, or if you just instantly are at your location where you're teleporting, or touchpad/trackpad/ analog stick if you're on the Rift. So like all these different locomotion things in a PvP multiplayer setting, how do you balance these things? And the other disadvantage that I had specifically to Serious Sam, the first encounter when I was playing with them, was they were able to get around the map so much faster than me. They could clear an entire like massive room, like hundreds of feet, within seconds, whereas me, I'm over there having to walk. And obviously they can't make my walking be too fast because that runs the risk of making the player get motion sick when they have those objects moving past their peripheral vision at too high a speed. So there's limits on how fast they can make me move. So then you've got to tone it down to where their teleport speed, do you have to have a cooldown on it? Is it a distance restriction? Things like that. Those are things that developers are going to have to keep in. So I feel like the speed at which that they were teleporting was the second disadvantage. But that one's something that you can again balance by making it a cooldown and restricting the physical distance that it can go. But for verticality, can somebody just could they teleport for the verticality? That's another thing that they got to take into account. I was actually physically having to jump and time my jumps and do things like that to get across gaps and things like that. But vertically, there's not too many places that I could get up to that they would have been able to easily get up to by just aiming up there and teleporting. So teleport's another thing that's going to have to be managed for verticality. I mean, there's just so much more that developers are going to have to start taking into account when balancing PvP games just within the VR. Again, I'm not even looking at VR versus non-VR, but just within the VR space. I mean, if I had been playing against my friends PvP in that Serious Sam, man, they would have dominated me, just because I never, for one thing, would have been able to catch up with them. They would be able to dodge my bullets, but I just wouldn't be able to track them. They could be Z dodging or brain fart on the name, serpentine, where you when somebody's shooting at you in a shooter, you want to dodge back and forth because it makes you a harder target. That with teleport, holy crap, it is so much more effective. If I'm dodging left and right, they can still see where I'm going, and they can see when I stop and start going the other direction. But if I'm doing that through teleport, I can teleport left, teleport right, left, right, left, right, and I can just do whatever I want for my. They don't know when I teleport here if I'm going to be going over here. I can be looking this direction and be teleporting in this direction, and then I can swap it up, and then I can do this. Teleport can be very cheap. I realize that we have to have teleport in VR for the next few years and maybe forever because of motion sickness and things like that. People that just that's what they prefer as their movement style. But I just don't know how in any PvP setting how we're going to have a combination of teleport with other methods, because I feel like those other methods would just almost always be at a disadvantage unless developers really feel like some way to truly master this. One thing that popped in my head is to do teleport. You would actually teleport, click to the location, and your character in game just moves to that at the same speed that somebody using touchpad would. But that kind of counters the whole point of teleport in that it's to remove that motion sickness, that sense of things moving past your head. When you do that movement, then your eyes are saying you're moving, but your ears, vestibular fluid is saying no, you're not moving, and that's what would again lead to motion sickness. So you can't really do that, even though visually that would give the same physical actions that you're doing in teleport, and it would give some level of fairness into the movement speed and the visual tracking of a player moving through a multiplayer match. But it counters the whole purpose of having teleport. So it's a really, really tricky thing. So developers, somebody somewhere, some genius has got to figure out how to make that work, or else we're just not, the PvP scene is just going to be dead on arrival for any VR game that gives you multiple options. Because just like with Battlefront, Star Wars Battlefront, the recent one made by DICE, it had the third person and first person. And I personally, if you guys saw my videos, I personally used first person all the time. I had never used third person, except when it forced me to when I was playing as one of the hero classes. But me personally, I prefer that immersion. I prefer that sense of actually being that character there and having in first person. But my field of view is lower, so I can't see as much when in first person. But also I can't see around corners. So that was something that I don't know what percentage of it is, but I imagine a large majority, well over 50% of the player population, probably played that game. That's a lot of P's. Probably played that game in the third person 90% of the time or more. Because it was just, statistically, you were being at an advantage by playing that way. So, that's what's going to happen for VR. Like, I might prefer to always be playing with touchpad locomotion, just because I like the feeling of it more, but I'm putting myself at a disadvantage by not picking teleport. So, like, why would I pick arm swinger? It's something like arm swinger. You actually have to, you can't aim. Teleport, you can be aiming around and not having to move your arm. But if I'm doing arm swinger, or the freedom locomotion, like hopping up and down, all that stuff is going to be hampering my accuracy. It's going to be negatively impacting my ability to win in a match. It might be more immersive, and I might be visually enjoying the spectacle of it a lot more, and feeling like I truly am there in this war, in this fight, or whatever the case may be. But I'm not going to be enjoying the fact that these guys are just wrecking me with their better accuracy, with their ability to actually track my movements, and my inability to track their movements and stuff. So, I don't know. There you guys have it. That's what this episode is about. Again, like, I'm not a developer, so this is not something I sit around all day in Unity or Unreal and actually try to figure out how these things are done. But these things, when I just kind of encounter them in Serious Sam co-op, I see that, and I just these things pop into my head like, wow, this can be a really big problem, and I don't want for PvP in VR to be dead on arrival. I want it to be something that can happen in the future. Some of my stuff like Bomb U and Racket NX, I mean, these things have been incredible experiences in VR. I've thoroughly enjoyed these and would actually love to watch it as an esports. But, those have been very specific situations in which every player is on that equal playground, because there's no, in Bomb U, it was pure room scale. Nobody else could move in any other way. In Racket NX, you're stationary, swinging a racket in 360 degrees. So again, there's no movement. So that's why I've enjoyed those so much. But for something like Serious Sam, like in PvP, I don't think I would enjoy that. And there were moments in the co-op where I just felt like these guys, they're teleporting ahead, they're spawning all the enemies in, and by the time I get there, I've kind of missed out on a little bit. So I don't hold them against that. I don't hold that against them. I want them to be able to play the game in a way that they enjoy. But man, it's just kind of a bummer knowing that every fight that I get to I was late and they had already cleared out most of the action. And yeah, so it's a tricky thing. VR developers, I do not envy the struggles you have coming up in designing PvP experiences for VR and giving options to players, because there's going to be a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of Twitter hate that I'm sure you guys are going to be getting, of people just trashing you on things, on YouTube comments, on Steam discussions, and on Twitter, people saying that your game sucks and why aren't you giving me this chance to do this locomotion, or you're just making it unfair for us people who choose this locomotion. And so I definitely don't envy you and what's ahead in your future, but I really hope you guys are able to overcome those things and figure it out. So hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of this VR essay, and keep an eye out for future episodes. Have a good one. Ta-ta.